Welcome, Campfire Crew. Let's get it on. Shadowman from Hell by Paranormal Nut. In the old days, we spent our evenings as a family parked in front of our old black and white TV set. There were only 4 channels back then: 3, 13, 8, and PBS. Being down in the hills, we could only pick up 2, 3, and 13. If atmospheric conditions were just right, and they seldom were, we could pull in a very snowy Channel 8. On this particular night, sometime around 1967 or 68, me and my brother were in our usual places, sprawled out on the living room floor in front of the boob tube. Dad was lying on the couch, and Mom was in her favorite chair. While we were watching TV, I remembered something I wanted. Unfortunately, it was upstairs, a place that experience had taught me to avoid at all costs on my own at night. Whatever it was that I wanted, the desire for it was strong enough that I was willing to risk life and limb to get it. So, there I stood at the bottom of the stairway looking up at the vinyl, accordion-style door and debating whether it was really worth the risk. Finally, I decided to go for it. I carefully slid the door open, hoping with everything in me that the noise wouldn't awake Mr. Titus, the family ghost. Stepping onto the first step, I reached up and turned on the two-way light. I couldn't feel his presence anywhere, so I cautiously walked up a few more steps. He still wasn't there. I was going to be safe. With a grin like the Cheshire Cat, I ran up the rest of the stairs, made the quick U-turn down the hallway to my room, flipped on the light, and grabbed whatever it was I wanted. I stood there for a moment bursting with pride. I was in my room, at night, alone, and I wasn't afraid. I was growing up. Just as I got to my bedroom doorway, my legs became heavy. I froze in my tracks. My heart began beating like it was going to shoot out of my chest like the creature from Alien. I was suddenly filled with that inexplicable fear that overwhelmed me every time Mr. Titus appeared. But this didn't feel like Mr. Titus. This was something different. Whatever this thing was, it wanted to hurt me, and I was trapped. The ghost of Mr. Titus was annoying at best. This new thing, though, was terrifying, and at the end of the hall, just inside Mom and Dad's room, waiting for me. All the excitement I had felt about being so brave and growing up was gone. I was terrified, and I wasn't used to something invisible wanting to actually hurt me. I knew I only had 3 choices, and I didn't like any of them. I could yell for help and listen to my family tell me to stop being stupid and possibly hear snide remarks from my brother until morning, or I could stay put and risk it coming after me and killing me. In the end, I decided the best option was the third. Take a chance on beating it to the stairs and getting down before it could hurt me. Well, it was comical to think I could beat it to the stairs. From my room, I had to run the length of the hallway, make a fast U-turn, and run down the stairs. It just needed to walk 2 steps, and it was there. I mustered up all the courage I could, took several deep breaths, steeled myself, then bolted down the hall as fast as my trembling little legs could take me. It was nowhere in sight. I was going to make it. But just as I was about to make the U-turn, a huge black shadow shaped like a stretching square came out of Mom and Dad's room. It was at least 2/3 of the wall high, and I felt as though I was being suffocated by it, as though it were trying to engulf me. There was no way I could turn back now. I had to force my shaky little legs on. Forcing my way to the top of the stairs, I stretched out my arms to brace myself against the wall so I wouldn't fall. Then, I felt a hand on my back, and it was pushing me forward. I was missing steps all the way down. I somehow managed to land on my feet when I landed on the living room floor. I quickly turned around and looked up the stairs, and there, at the top, stood this Shadowman. We stared at one another for a moment. He had made his point, and he knew it. He slowly turned away and went back into my Mom and Dad's room. This wouldn't be the only time he would push me down the stairs. It happened a lot after that. In time, he must have gotten bored, because he eventually stopped doing it, for which I was quite thankful. What Was That? By Canny Ways. As I was leaving my girlfriend's house around 3 a.m. one morning because I couldn't stay over, it was a rare rainy day, and it was unusually heavy and way too windy, making it difficult to jump off the compound's walls that were surrounding her house. I used to live in Saudi Arabia at the time. After a lot of tries, I finally succeeded. My girlfriend lives around 25 miles away from my city, so using a shortcut I always do, I regretted it that night because the road was barely lit and surrounded by deserts on both sides. As I was driving as fast as I could in the heavy rain, the lights or whatever light there was on the entire road went off, so naturally I had to slow down. Using the headlights as bright as possible, I still couldn't see where I was, mainly due to all the water all over the glass in front of me. Matters went worse when it suddenly started raining literal ice cubes, and anyone who has experienced life in Saudi Arabia would know that this is a rarity. I started to panic because I had taken my dad's car behind the back, as I usually do, but a glimmer of hope appeared as I saw what looked like someone waving a flashing light. I stuck my head out the window facing all of the ice cubes and heavy rain, and I saw the man approaching me. He seemed normal to me from afar, but as he edged closer, I noticed how unusually tall he was, and it kind of creeped the shit out of me. I couldn't see details of his face from the distance he was at, so I just closed the windows, locked the doors, and then tried to look at him from inside the car. That's when I saw he started to wave at me rapidly, and he got so close that I could see his face. That smile. I think that's what they mean by shit-eating grin from ear to ear. He was mumbling something that I couldn't hear, and I was literally about to shit my pants until I noticed a light striking my rear mirror. Another car was approaching. I look back, and I see this guy in front of me doing something with his hands that makes everything smear on the glass between us. At least that's what I thought I saw. And then I saw him reaching for my car door handle and trying to get in. I don't think the car behind me noticed anything, but I got back on the road, and that car had passed me and was helping me guide me out of that place, until I finally hit the main road. The rain started to stop, and I couldn't speed due to all the ice on the asphalt. I was trying to just pay attention to where I was going. And that's when I looked to the side of the road in front of me, and I saw a black dog, and I swear it was smiling at me. Despite how slow I was going, I couldn't dodge the damn dog. After making a split decision, I had to convince myself that it was me or him, and I sadly hit it with my car. I rolled to a stop, left the car, and started looking around behind me, but there was nothing there. I mean, nothing at all. I ran back to my car, forgetting the conditions. I just started speeding towards home. A strange urge inside me was telling me to look at the desert surrounding the road, and I started looking from time to time, and I was seeing nothing. But approximately 10 minutes later, I look and I saw that tall figure standing in front of me off to the side again, waving that flashlight rapidly. I didn't look back again, hit the gas, and got home. What the hell was that? Scariest night of my life. Creepy Uber Guy, submitted by Charmaine. This is not my story, but my husband's. He recently certified as an Uber driver in South Africa. At the end of every drive shift, I always ask if he had any interesting fares. He'd been working from 4 this morning and had taken a break to fetch me to bring me to work. On the trip, I asked how his morning had been. He looked at me and got a bit of an odd look on his face. He told me that the fare he had just dropped off before coming to fetch me really creeped him out. And please understand something, my husband doesn't really get creeped out. That's my department. When my husband arrived at the pickup point, he said he was really hesitant to allow the guy in the car. My husband was worried that he was wasted drunk and might puke in the car. I mean, no Uber wants that. But he accepted the ride and realized that wasted, yes, On alcohol, no. Hence, my husband not paying too much attention to the mumbling coming from the back seat. Every now and then, the guy would speak up, and thinking the guy was talking to him, my husband would ask him, "Say again?" The guy at this point tells my husband how disappointed he is with himself, that he let it get the better of him, and he killed his family in the shower. He then went back into his mumble fest. My husband says he didn't think anything of it. The guy was probably tripping balls on acid or something. My husband said what actually creeped him out was the end of the ride. The guy got out, stuck his head back in the door, and told my husband to have a good day, be kind to animals, and don't kill your family. Up to that point, he just seemed wasted. The look on his face, however, was chillingly serious, and his eyes seemed dead. I looked at my husband, asking if he was serious. He knows my love of scary, creepy stories. 'Cause what if the guy was really telling the truth? My Girlfriend's Past Comes Back, submitted by Roger Moore 76. First things first, none of the names in this are the real names for obvious reasons. This happened about 10 years ago with my then girlfriend. I still talk to her, not for what I'm about to tell you that much, but, well, we parted ways for straightforward reasons, and it was hard at first just being friends, but hey, we still are. I met Jean at school. I played baseball and she was on the softball team. Both of our groups were having their pictures taken for the yearbook one day, and we were sophomores, and Jean was new to our school and became really popular very quickly, as she was very pretty. Interesting to look back and see how that works. Good-looking new kids always seem to blend in with the in crowd, while the others rarely get a nod from them. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. So we bumped into each other on our way to our fields and struck up a cheesy conversation. Mind you, I was friends with a lot of the cool kids, but I really wasn't in their inner circle. I was just a guy who got along with everyone, but wasn't being voted for prom king or whatever. Jean and I had knocked our bats together, and for those of you who know that ping sound metal bats make, well, it was super loud. She was walking with her teammates, as was I, and we both laughed at how everyone was startled by the noise. I introduced myself and said something stupid like, "Welcome to our town," immediately regretting it, as she had been there since the beginning of school, and it was now the end of March. She didn't care, though, and said thanks. She then said she had seen me in band class. I was a drummer, but she never had a chance to meet everyone at school. That made sense. Our class alone had about 700 kids in it. We stood talking despite our friends yelling at us to get to practice, and I asked where she lived. She told me, and it wasn't all that far from my neighborhood. She said she had to go, but it was nice chatting with me, and then out of nowhere she gave me her number and said to call her that night. I said it back a few times to memorize it, and she smiled and ran off to her field. Alright, without being too mushy, does everyone remember that feeling you got at that age when you realize you like someone and you're pretty sure they like you back? Well, there I was. That night, I called her after I got some homework done, and we talked for over an hour about school and music. She played clarinet, but was really into metal, and I thought that was cool. When she had to get going, she did what always blows guys away. She asked me if I'd like to get together that weekend to hang out. I said yeah, and we talk about it in school. Cloud 9 going to sleep that night. Jean was girl next door beautiful. She looked like Doris Day, to tell the truth. I wasn't a slouch myself, but certainly not as hot as other guys at school. At least that's what I thought. I hadn't had a girlfriend in about a year and was hoping that maybe we'd become boyfriend and girlfriend. And after that weekend, we did. That weekend, we met at the mall with some of her friends and some of my pals. It didn't take long for us to leave the group and start wandering around the mall, laughing and talking. She was very innocent and shy at first, but that went away after a half hour of hanging out. I would soon find out why she was shy and didn't have a boyfriend. Okay, this has been a lot of backstory, I know, but it's pretty important. I just want to make sure everyone knows that we started our relationship on a completely clean slate, and I knew nothing about her past. So, speed up to a month later, and we're an item now, and it was about this time that she told me that she was adopted, and she had spent a lot of her life in foster care. Her parents had drug issues and she was taken away from them. I didn't press her on things, but I did ask how she felt about it and stuff like that. She'd been put in foster care when she was 6, so it had been some time since she'd seen her parents, although they tried to get her back a number of times. Then I guess they just gave up. She had been with 2 other families before being adopted by her current parents, and was happy to be with them and in our town for good. Again, I didn't ask too much, but she hinted that her last foster family was a little messed up. I would see how messed up firsthand, unfortunately. One night, we went out to the movies, and afterwards we decided to walk around the mall the theaters were in until it closed. Just normal teenage evening. We were in a Spencer's Gifts laughing at all the silly stuff in there when she looked over my shoulder and froze. I asked her what was wrong, but she just flipped her hoodie up over her head, put her head down, grabbed my hand, and led me out of the store. She kept her head down until we were a bunch of stores away from Spencer's, and Jean said we needed to leave. I asked her again what was wrong, but she just said we had to go. And we left, got to my dad's car, and got in. She burst into tears and leaned over into me. I hugged her and asked her what was wrong. She kept crying and said she'd tell me later. That's when there was a tapping on the window of the car. I looked up to see this guy, long greasy hair, creepy looking, just standing there tapping on the window with a quarter or some kind of coin. Jean looks over at him too and says, "Dennis, just go, go, go!" I turn the car on and start backing out with this guy still standing there, staring at us with that creepy grin on his face. Jean was back to crying, and I was totally confused as to what was going on. I get on the highway back towards her house and say, "You have to tell me what's going on." She took a few deep breaths and said, that guy back there was my foster brother. He did things to me, did bad things to me." Not wanting her to get too worked up, I didn't say much and just let her talk. She told me about how when she was put in the foster home, this guy, I'll call him Bob, seemed really nice at first. He was older and seemed to be protective. There was also a younger brother in the family too. But after about a month, Bob started to act weird. She said he would creep into her room at night and she'd wake up and he'd be just sitting at her little makeup desk staring at her. Wanting to scream but also not wanting to cause a fuss, she would just whisper for him to leave, and he would. But then he began touching her inappropriately, and it was making her cringe. So she told her foster parents that it was getting weird with Bob, but they blew it off and said that he just liked her, and it was just hugging. One day, the mother was getting ready to go out with the father, and became frantic that a valuable necklace was missing from her jewelry chest. Jean says that her foster mother went through every room in the house looking for it, but couldn't find it and was really distressed. I guess it was a family heirloom that was really pricey. Well, the parents still went out that night, and Bob came into Jean's room and woke her up while she was asleep. She asked him what he was doing, and he held up the necklace and said, "This is going to be found in your room, unless," and he pointed to his crotch. Jean said no freaking way, and he simply said, "Okay, who do you think they're going to believe, me or you?" I can't imagine how she felt. I can't imagine the fear of having to go back with another foster family. I'm sad to say, she did do something to Bob that she wasn't proud of, and then cried herself to sleep. Something similar happened 2 more times, but she finally got adopted and was out of there. She told a caseworker what had happened, and that person followed up, but I guess the family was outraged and threatened all kinds of stuff. I think it's important to point out now that all of this happened in a city about an hour away from ours, so why this guy was at the mall that night made no sense. I got mad and wanted to go back to kick the guy's ass, but Jean begged me to let it go, so I did. She calmed down, and by that time we were at her house, so we went inside and hung out until I had to go home. The following week, we both had games, and mine ended earlier than hers, so I jogged over to watch her play. There was only an inning left, and I clumped up onto the bleachers and looked for her in the field. But what I immediately saw was Bob, standing along the fence on the other side of the field. That creepy fucker was standing there with his hand in his pants. I jumped up and ran around the backstop, but he had obviously seen me and was hauling ass for the parking lot. I can't tell you how pissed off I was. And I was unsure if I should tell Jean. I didn't want to freak her out any more than she already had been. So, instead, I told my dad about it later when I got home, and he said he was going to call Jean's dad and let him know what was going on, just to be safe. A couple of days later, Jean and I went to the library to study, and then went outside behind it, where there was a creek and some benches. We were talking and making out a little because no one was around, when a huge splash interrupted us, and we both looked up to see Bob on the other side of the creek. He'd thrown something in the water, and was now standing there waving and flashing that creepy fucking smile. Jean gave out a little shriek, and I pulled her up and back into the library, where I said, "Screw this, I'm calling the cops." So I did and explained what was going on, and they came out and looked around, but there was no trace of Bob. The cops told us to keep them informed if anything else happened, but at that point, the guy hadn't done anything illegal, and there wasn't much they could do. That was not what we wanted to hear, but I ended up taking Jean home, and we told her parents what was going on. Everyone was concerned. I mean, how did this guy find out where Jean had been adopted? How did he know where we were spending our time? Where the hell was he right now? All questions unanswered. A mutual friend, one of the cool kids, Lal, was having a party that weekend, and we were planning on going. It was going to be a beer party as the guy's parents weren't home, and everyone was kind of lying to their parents as to where they were going. You guys remember kid stuff, right? Jean and I got there, and there were people all over the place. Some playing cards and pool in the basement, others upstairs playing silly games like spin the bottle and whatever. I wasn't drinking because I was working on a baseball scholarship and didn't want any marks on my record. Jean was having some beer, and it was a fun night. As I said in the beginning, I get along with everyone. I remember we were standing in the kitchen with some friends when we heard all this shouting coming from the front of the house. The group of us went out there to see what was going on, and two of the guys from our football team were yelling and pushing someone out the front door. Guess who? Fucking Bob. I broke away from Jean, yelled at the guys that he was a piece of shit stalking us, and about 6 of us ran out the front door and chased Bob up the street. He got away and jumped into a red Honda rice burner and took off. And we stopped running, and on the way back I told the guys what was going on. They'd been drinking, but what I thought was really cool was all of them saying that they had my back and would keep a lookout for Bob. The party went on without incident, and things were cool. Jean was obviously a little freaked out, but she didn't want to leave. I took her home after going to a restaurant to sober her up just a little bit so as to not let her parents know what had been going on. I kissed her goodnight and then went home myself. But Sunday morning, our phone rang and my dad answered it. It was still pretty early, but I could tell he was a little heated. My bedroom door popped open. He came in and said, "Where were you last night?" I knew bullshitting him at this point wasn't going to work, so I told him the whole story. When I told him I hadn't been drinking, he softened a bit, but told me I was still in trouble for lying about where Jean and I were, but we'd handle that later. The phone call was from Jean's parents. Bob had paid a visit to their house during the night and tried to break in. It was only by luck that Jean's mom had fallen asleep in their family room and heard someone trying to get in through a basement window. She went down to check it out and got a good look at Bob's face and was able to give that description to the cops. Again, that slippery shit got away. Later that day, though, the cops did find a car matching the description we gave them. It was parked at the edge of a Walmart in town and had what they claimed was something suspicious on the front seat, so they got in and searched it. What they found was some weed, but more importantly, a DSLR with a full memory card full of pictures of Jean and me, but mostly of her. Everywhere. Jean going to school, Jean playing softball. Some were of her in her house taken through the windows. It was creepy. There was more, though. There was a box of older pictures from when Jean lived with this asshat, and a notebook with all of these notes to Jean written inside. They said things like, "I still have the necklace and you owe me," and I haven't had your lips around my dick in a while. I think we should change that. Stuff like that. There was also a duffel bag in the trunk with handcuffs, duct tape, PVC pipe, zip ties, and another camera. It was really freaking creepy. We didn't see Bob for another week or so, but this last time would put an end to things. Gene's team was in our area's sectional playoffs at a local municipal stadium, and both of our families went to watch her play, and a whole bunch of people from our school went too. In the third inning, I was talking to a buddy, one of the football guys I mentioned before, and he was telling a funny joke. It made me start choking on the water I was drinking because I was laughing so hard, and I got up to try to shake it off. I walked over to the edge of the stands and saw Bob. He was on the other side of the field, standing there and just staring. He didn't see me, and my choking stopped pretty quick. I went back to my friend and told him what was up, and he just said fucking A. He told 2 more guys, and I told my dad, who immediately dialed the cops and said for me to not get involved. Sorry, Dad. No way. We jumped up, and my buddies went around behind the stadium while I ran around the outfield. I remember my dad calling my name and telling me to get back there, but I was determined to not let this asshat get away. By the time I got over to the other side of the field, my buddies had Bob making a run straight towards me. He had nowhere else to go, and I dove at his midsection and took him out and onto the ground. I'll admit, we did rough him up a little bit, but remember the cops were on their way, and we didn't want to go too far. I'm not ashamed to say it, though. I did blast him one in the balls. The cops showed up, everyone in the stands was wondering what the hell was going on, and they took this guy away as he had more weed on him, and it was in individual baggies in his pockets, so it looked like he was selling. I saw Jean watching from her dugout, and all I could do was give her a lame thumbs up to try to let her know that this guy was going out. When we got together after the game and all the statements were made to the cops, they overlooked Bob's claim that we had beat him up, and I told her what had happened. She burst into tears, but I told her it was going to be okay. I had to go to court and make more statements, but didn't get more involved in things as it was mostly handled by Jean and her parents. Bob wasn't a minor, so he was being tried as an adult, and he got convicted of multiple things, including harassment, but the weed was his major downfall. He had a record, so there was no first-time offender slap on the wrist stuff. He admitted that he had been following Jean for a while, but then claimed that he was mentally ill and needed help. Yeah, right. Somehow, he convinced someone at the adoption agency to share Jean's information on some sob story about being her foster brother and didn't know where she was and really needed to talk to her, but I don't know much more about that. Jean and I stayed together for the rest of our high school days before breaking up when I went to college to play ball, and she and her family moved to California. We're friends on Instagram and Facebook and PM each other every now and again. I'm sure Bob is out of jail now, or it's getting close to that time. I don't ever bring it up to Jean, but I hope he doesn't try to find her again. And though it's been 10 years and we're no longer an item, I would still chase that guy down and give him another shot to the balls if I had to. What Was After Me? Submitted by Christina S. Back when I was 20, I lived in Missouri out in the boonies. I was driving home one night after keyboard lessons. We lived way down a winding dirt road in the mountains. Tons of trees everywhere. I got about a mile or so away from my house when my car just died. It was around 10 or 11 at night, and I didn't know what else to do but start walking. So, I locked the car and began walking down the long dirt road surrounded by trees and mountains. Thankfully, it was a full moon, so it was lit up just enough to see the road. I came to a house and saw a light on and heard people talking. So, with my heart pounding, worried I'd be disturbing someone, I knocked on the door. All I heard was, "Who the fuck is that?" As you can imagine, me being a little 20-year-old girl, I got scared to death and took off before they came to the door. I continued walking, and suddenly I started hearing leaves crunching in the forest to the side. So I stopped to listen, and whatever it was stopped too. I started walking again, and I heard the leaves crunching. Again, when I stopped, it stopped. This really freaked me out, especially since I couldn't see what it was. So I walked faster, and it started moving faster too. I was like, oh shit, whatever that is, this thing is after me. I took off running, and I could hear it running in the leaves. I ran until I couldn't run anymore and looked around, but I didn't see anything. Out of breath, I could finally see my house and then continued to walk home. I got a friend to come help me with the car, and it turns out it was just a loose battery cable. So all that for nothing. This is why I'm scared of what's in the dark. I would love to know what that was. Creature in My Hotel Room by Jungle Cat. After I left my father's house, I went on a vacation to Tennessee. At this point, I was in Memphis in a hotel room on a high floor where my shepherd, who was with me, was taking a keen interest on the activities outside the window. Not on the ground below the window, that is. She was looking straight out. I had my curtains open because the lights were fluorescent, and I get migraines and was opting to not have crushing head pain that night. The front desk would not initially provide me additional towels to cover the shades at check-in, leaving the sodium halide or whatever they are road lights as my room lighting. I feel like I need to explain this because who leaves their curtains open, right? Anyway, after initially thinking the dog was looking at traffic, it occurred to me that she's a little bit smarter than that. I started to feel uneasy, closed the curtains, noticed the dog looking around the edges, and then I called her away and phoned the front desk to ask again for some extra towels for the lamps. The dog and I settled in for some TV, and then bed. The creature showed up in the middle of the room the next day, a Sunday, at 4:30 a.m. I was awake but groggy when my dog jumped off the bed and walked 3/4 of the way around it, sniffing. This thing raised its muscular hand and turned outward and hooked it in the air right above my big shepherd. This seemed to make my shepherd lay down on her belly right there next to this beast, and as I woke up more, and before it noticed me, I was lying on my side facing the center of the room where it stood. At first I thought I had an intruder, and then it occurred to me that the door was deadbolted. After that thought, it became invisible, surprising me, and then visible again in exactly the same spot, a little angry that I had witnessed all of this. The creature looked like a short, burly man with a long torso and short, dark, possibly furry legs. I didn't get a good look at the legs. It was very muscular, a little taller than 4 feet, but you could have put his torso on a 6-foot man and it would have been proportional. He had dark, curly hair and a dark, curly, medium-length beard shaped to a point. He also had what looked like something poking out above his head towards his face, either ears or small horns. This is the best I could make out since the room at this time was just lit from a light from the bathroom. So he was strictly backlit, and the light was reflecting in my eye. By any measure, I'd say it looked like a satyr, but until this day thought these to be strictly members of the fantasy realm. So, what does a demon do when it's mad? If there are demon phones, the word is out that chucking a fit doesn't get much traction with me in the moment. So this one tries to kill me? While one hand was over my dog and she wasn't moving, he pointed 2 fingers at me, and suddenly my heart started racing like I was finishing out a stress test. Part of me was afraid, and part of me was impressed that he could throw energy around like that, while having some confidence that I'm a poor candidate for this particular attack. I thought to myself, he's not going to have any luck with this, and I rolled flat on my back, crossed my arms over my chest, and started softly singing hymns, because I didn't want him reading any other thoughts. This went on for at least 5 minutes, or what seemed like forever, and then he just gave up and left. I haven't seen that thing since. Anyone heard of anything like this? And what is the best tactic to take when dealing with hostile things? I feel like I was lucky in this case, but now I've met at least 2 hostile demons in my life, and I'm concerned the next one will be worse. Also, I went to a doctor the next day, and my heart rate and pulse were fine. . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . The Trapper, submitted by Karen A. I recently remembered a story my mother told me when I was growing up. I discounted it as a tall tale, but I've always been a fan of urban myths and was surprised to realize I haven't come across this story anywhere else. Here's how it went as I recall. This took place about 100 years ago on the Dakota Plains. It was in March, when the days were getting longer and the worst of winter had ended. Animals were coming out each day to check the approach of spring, leaving tracks in the snow leading back to their lairs. It was a good time to hunt and trap, so early one morning, a friend of my grandparents set out to do just that. His plan was to spend the day setting up muskrat traps in nearby ponds and creeks. Around midday, clouds rolled in, and suddenly the air filled with snow, the wind began to howl, and the trapper found himself lost in a blizzard. Now, this man was no fool. He knew he faced a very dangerous situation. Whiteout conditions meant the man could see mere inches in front of his face, and the temperatures were dropping fast, and with the wind chill, it would be difficult to survive the night ahead. Shelter. He needed to find shelter. The last trap he'd set was in a muskrat lodge along a creek not too far back, so he turned around and attempted to retrace his steps, moving quickly and saying his prayers that God would help him find his way. Whether it was truly the grace of God or mere good fortune, he soon made out tall, shadowy figures a few steps in front of him. A grove of trees. Good. That meant he'd found the creek. The man carefully made his way about halfway down the steep incline toward the creek, and then started moving sideways along the embankment. Within a few steps, his way was blocked by a tree lying on its side, uprooted from the grove during a spring flood many seasons ago. He crawled back up the embankment along the tree until he found where the roots had pulled the tree from the earth. The snow in this hollow was loose and relatively easy to dig out. The space would be his shelter for the night. He set down his pack and ventured back out into the storm, now following the tree down toward the creek bed. Cattails and rushes poked out above the snow along the bank, and with freezing fingers he gingerly broke off one stalk, and then another. Although too wet to burn, these could be woven together and laid down inside the shelter to protect his body from the frozen ground overnight. The whiteout conditions made it difficult to track the passage of time. It could have been minutes or hours as the man gathered reeds with meticulous precision. He never took more than a few steps away from the fallen tree, and he only broke off the reeds directly in front of him before turning back around and returning to the tree. If he got off by even a few degrees, he could easily walk past the tree and wander away from his shelter, and that was a risk he could not take. He repeated this process several times. Eventually, it grew darker and colder, and the man decided that more reeds was not worth taking the risk. He then made his way back to his shelter and started weaving and arranging the reeds. He was fairly confident that this shelter was enough to survive the night, but this blizzard could last anywhere from 10 hours to 10 days. His future was still very uncertain. After a while, the man noticed a subtle change to the sound of the howling wind. He listened carefully and came to realize that he heard the faint sound of a bleating sheep. And if he wasn't mistaken, the scent of smoke was drifting along with the snow. Could there be other people nearby? He considered his options. If someone was nearby with a fire and domesticated animals, then unlike him, that someone was in a much better position to withstand a long blizzard. Yet he knew there were no farms nearby. Could it be a peddler traveling through, or new settlers? Hey, maybe it was Indians. Although the trapper had met many friendly Indians in the area, they did not keep sheep. Plains Indians were nomadic, and domesticated animals moved too slowly to keep up with them on their travels. On the other hand, hostile Indians might steal such animals during a raid on nearby white settlers. The trapper did not want to walk into a camp of Indian raiders. After some thought, the man picked up some of the rushes and started weaving them together in a long, thick cord. He worked diligently for several hours until he had crafted a long rope. He tied one to the roots of his tree and the other to his waist, and then he started to climb up the embankment. His plan was to travel the length of the rope and see what he encountered. If he couldn't see anything before he ran out of rope, he would return to his shelter. But if he did see a campfire, he would watch from the cover of darkness and determine who was there before proceeding. Each step the man took was deliberate and cautious. He wasn't worried about being heard above the howling winds of the storm, but the embankment was steep and his rope was not strong. If he fell, he could break his rope and lose his way. Even worse, he could injure himself in the fall. So he had to be patient and not let his eagerness overtake his common sense. Finally, he reached the top of the embankment. Though the wind was still howling, the snow flurries were weaker within the shelter of the tree grove. And there, not too far away, he could see a large fire through the falling snow. A bleeding sheep was tied to a nearby tree. 2 other figures were also visible in the light of the fire. The 2 creatures were clearly bipedal, but it was equally clear that they were not human. They were covered in fur and extremely tall. Both had elongated jaws full of sharp, snapping teeth, and the trapper suddenly realized that the howling he'd been hearing was not all from the wind. These 2 monstrous creatures were fighting over the small, terrified sheep. The trapper quickly turned around and retraced his path back down the embankment, and although he made it back safely, he no longer felt safe. He was trapped there, with hungry monsters fighting less than 50 feet above him. The rest of the night he lay huddled in his shelter, shaking with cold and fearful that a monster would come down the embankment. Hours later, the wind eventually lulled him into an uneasy slumber. When he next awoke, the air was still, and the early light of dawn revealed a cloudless sky. The storm was over. The man lay quietly and listened. He heard no howls or animal cries, and there were no wafting smells of a campfire. Eventually he rose from his shelter and made his way up the embankment. Snowdrifts covered most of the clearing in the tree grove, but a thinner layer of snow covered the area where a fire had once been. There were uneven patches in the snow where huge feet or paws had stepped. The end of a rope was visible and was tied to a tree. The man tugged on it, and a frayed end came loose from the snowdrift. No sheep, no monsters, no evidence of what had happened here the night before. The man didn't linger. He quickly set off back towards his home, pausing here and there to retrieve the traps he'd set just the day before. He didn't plan on returning to this area ever again. That was the end of the story that my mother told me. She swore it was true, that she overheard a trusted family friend telling it to her parents in confidence, and he was not the type of man to lie or indulge in flights of fancy. Still, I figured this was just a clever tale to discourage children from playing outside or wandering off. Given the impact it had on my mother, it did that very well. Hey gang, Uncle Josh here. I know that one might be questionable, and I'm sure I'm going to hear about it in the comments, but I really want to thank Christina S. for sharing, because you know what? I read them all. The Dweller on the Point by Mason W. This is one of the few experiences of the supernatural that I've had. My grandmother's family name is a German surname meaning the dweller on the point or corner. I presume it refers to the location of a homestead in a parcel, but maybe not. My all-German grandmother wasn't tall or svelte, but I never saw Mabel Zip Winfield, 1896 to 1995, as anything other than beautiful. Not many people from Mineral Ridge, Ohio went to college in her day. My grandmother, though, was intelligent and well-traveled. She read constantly. She lived her last 30 years alone with minimal help. She loved life, animals, and the good in people. She lived through quite a bit of history, and her reminiscences were fascinating. I remember being surprised by her only twice. My dad died in December of 1992, a week before her 97th birthday. Not many people see a child die at 72, but she was totally composed around me. After New Year's, though, she started talking about retiring to a Mohawk Valley community for the widows of Freemasons. I see now that that was her test. She didn't want to be a burden on me and my mother. All I had to say was nothing. I told her that I needed her near us. I think she believed me because I heard no more talk about a home. The other surprise was a year later. She said once offhandedly that she didn't see how there could be a heaven. How could God fit everybody up in there, she'd say. I assured her that the one who made the universe would have no trouble making more housing, and that there was surely something waiting for her and all of us. I wanted her to think that, even if it can't be proved. Maybe there was a third surprise. It was days after my grandmother passed at 99 and several months. I woke up in my apartment from the first good sleep I'd had since. I'd slept so well that I'd forgotten my grief. A big, splotchy white light form was in the corner of my room. Its visual qualities were strange. You only see light when it hits something. This one held its own brilliance. Its shape was squatty, like a broad, irregular fire plug. I turned the light on and off a few times and thumped myself on the temple. I saw it either way, for nearly a quarter of a minute. It's a rare dream that survives that sort of treatment, or a rare ghost that stays so long. Then it faded. So shocked had I been to see it at all, I had not thought about what it could have meant. Then I remembered my cause for grief, and recognized the profile. By her 10th decade, my grandmother was short. Her walker was too short for her to boot, and it made her slump. The profile I saw was her over that walker, with the tail of her dress draping. My impression is that was a sign reminding me to lead a good life and then catch you on the upside. Was it her farewell? It would have been like her. Hey gang, thanks for listening to Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have a true scary story you'd like me to narrate on this channel, send it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel, and make sure you hit the notification bell to get all the updates when I post. Also, I'd like to give a big shout out to my latest patrons, Kara, Alex, and Sarah. Thank you so much for your support. If you're interested in supporting this channel via Patreon, visit my website, truescarystories.net, click on support, and away you go. Follow me on social media. All of the links to that are in the description below, and I'll do my best to follow you back. Everyone, be excellent to each other. Until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.